Okay, we can start now. Good morning to all of you. I would like to thank you in front of SELA for joining us today. We are very happy to have you all here, and we truly hope that you will find this webinar useful. Today's webinar will be hosted by Uroš Popović, partner from BD2P, Serbian SELA member firm. He has extensive experience for more than 15 years in corporate, commercial, and M&A matters in Serbia and in Montenegro as well. He's admitted to both the Serbian bar and the New York bar. Uroš will be accompanied by Matej Perpar, partner from Kirn Perpar law firm, Slovenian SELA member. He has extensive experience in corporate, commercial, and M&A and other areas of law. Matej is a member of the Slovenian Bar Association and an active member of German Chamber of Commerce, and as well as the British Slovenian Chamber of Commerce. Matej also holds a certificate enabling him to act as a member of supervisory boards. Finally, we also have a guest speaker from Russia, Mr. Oliver Chiric, partner from TA Advisory. Oliver's practice focuses on complex cross-border litigation, asset financing and recovery, banking, white-collar crime and investigations. His industry focus includes banking, mining, finance, telecom, energy, and real estate. Oliver has acted in numerous proceedings in Switzerland and abroad. I now give the word to Uroš. I encourage you to share your impressions, but please ask questions at the end of presentations. Uroš, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jovana. Thank you also on my behalf for joining this webinar today. I'm sure that you will find it useful, at least at some point. Just a friendly reminder, we are certainly not going to be expressing or taking any views or opinions on the political side of things. What is the goal of this presentation is to show you the facts, the statistics, and the economic impact of the situation in Ukraine, first from the Serbian point of view, then from the EU point of view, and finally from the Russian point of view. So I will go right into the first slide, which shows in a very simple manner the timeline of the events, of development events that will be discussed in this webinar. As you all know, at the end of February was the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, and since then there have been 5 total packages of sanctions imposed against Russia as a response from mostly Western states. Now, the interesting position that Serbia finds itself in as a result of this situation is being basically one of the only countries or the only country in this part of the world that hasn't imposed any sanctions on Russia, which has basically resulted in a mass exodus of Russian companies and Russian-owned businesses into the territory of Belgrade for the most part, but also Serbia proper. So let's, what are the statistics? Basically, what we have seen, sorry, I'm admitting people from the lobby because I'm in control. Okay, there you go. Are my slides showing or just okay? All right. So again, Serbia is on an interesting crossroads today, being a candidate member of the European Union, but at the same time maintaining very strong traditional and political ties with Russia, historically and economically as well. Now, what has been happening since the end of February and until early April is that we've seen a huge influx of Russian-owned businesses and Russian companies in Belgrade. the statistics are shown on the next slide, and they are quite staggering. Basically, in the 3 years prior to this situation, we've had the same amount of Russian-owned businesses being established in Serbia as we have seen in the 5 weeks as of the beginning of the conflict. So we are talking about 323 legal entities being established with Russian founders or Russian-owned capital in the Republic of Serbia between 24 February and 1st April. And I believe the record was broken on 25th of March, when we had a total of 51 Russian companies established and registered at the Serbian Business Register Agency. So what this has done is obviously impact the Serbian economic conditions on a multitude of levels. The demand for legal services has risen. The demand for housing, especially because a lot of these Russian citizens are coming with their whole families. So if a company is transferring, for example, 300 employees, that's not going to be just 300 people. That's going to be more likely closer to maybe even 1,000 people per such big company. This has resulted in, for example, prices of rental units in Serbia, both commercial and residential, basically doubling in some parts of the city. For example, where our office is located, you would not be able to find an apartment to rent on a month-to-month basis anymore. And the prices have literally doubled. With regards to commercial space, this is also in high demand. So this has been really shaking things up in Serbia, and it really remains to be seen how much longer and how much further these things can go up before they stabilize. I thought that it would be useful and interesting to show what are the most common or the most represented activities that have been registered by these businesses that are coming into Serbia. And I should add that it's not just purely Russian-owned businesses that are being relocated. Also, international companies are relocating parts of their Russian operations to Belgrade and to Serbia as a result of the exiting from the Russian market, which Oliver will definitely cover in a little more detail. As you can all guess, the most represented activity is computer programming and IT consulting services. So these are basically programmers, software people, software companies. The logical choice being the fact that these companies can very easily relocate and very easily work from a remote location, even from a different country, obviously. And then we have some general activities such as non-specialized household trade or business and other management consultancy activities, which is basically, it just means that these companies are engaged or could be engaged in any number of different activities, because under the Serbian law, you only need to basically register the so-called main activity, but you are de facto and de jure able to engage in any legally allowed activity that doesn't require special permits. So these are the numbers that we are dealing with in Serbia for now. I say for now because the next question that I'm addressing is whether these companies are here as a short-term, medium-term, or a long-term solution. And just as a spoiler, there is no answer right now. It's very, very hard to predict how long these companies will stay here and how lucrative they will find running their businesses in Serbia. What I've heard from some people in the real estate rental industry is that they've been signing 1 year, 2 year, 3 year lease contracts, both for commercial and residential spaces. So I'd say that the indicators are currently showing that at least in the medium term, these companies will be around. Also, when you look at the status of the conflict, it doesn't seem that it will be resolved anytime soon. So when you combine those two factors, I'd say that it's a safe bet that a majority of these businesses will still be here in the next at least 1 to 3 years. And as you can see on the slide, we are still expecting some of the quite large Russian players such as Yandex and Luxoft, who have already established their LLCs in Belgrade and have announced the arrival of at least 300 employees per company. We've seen in our practice other companies that we've been working for in the past few months that have brought anywhere between 10 and 70 or 80 employees. So I'd say that this is still ongoing, and again, it remains to be seen how long they will actually stick around. There are obviously numerous benefits for Russian-based companies and Russian investors to set up their business in Serbia. I'm not going to name them all, but you can see on the slide all the bilateral and multilateral treaties that Serbia is a part of that are affecting the decision-making process for these businesses to a significant extent. So again, assuming that the authorities in Serbia maintain the current attitude, and again, this is a different question, and it's another matter how long they will be able to remain neutral. I do believe that there are quite strong incentives for Russian businesses to continue setting up in Serbia. On the bank account opening side of things, the matters are a little more complex. In the beginning, there were only a few banks that were even willing to entertain the idea of opening bank accounts for Russian-owned businesses being set up in Serbia. I would say now that the situation is somewhat better because a few more banks have joined the group that are willing to open these bank accounts. But of course, the procedures are fairly lengthy. The banks are being careful not to encroach on the policies of their, I guess you could call them holding companies from abroad. Also, Russians who have accounts in banks that are excluded from the international payment transactions cannot use Visa or MasterCard cards issued by those banks in Serbia. So there are some difficulties with payment transactions, receiving payments, providing payments, but so far it seems to be functioning, and there are options. So again, it's a very fluid situation. It's a sort of a moving target constantly, but for now, it seems that these businesses are still coming. A lot of them are already here, and it seems like they will be around for at least some time. So this brings me to the end of my presentation, just on time for Mate to take over.
Uroš, thank you. As already mentioned by Uroš, in response to Russia's recognition of the Donetsk and Lugansk regions of Ukraine and Russian interest in Ukraine that followed, EU adopted 5 packages of sanctions. These sanctions severely restrict economic relations with Russia, Russian entities, and individuals. So let me start with some legal notes. how these sanctions are implemented in EU and consequently also in Slovenia. These sanctions are adopted by the EU Council in form of regulation. Why regulation? Well, regulation is a legislative act that is binding once adopted across the whole European Union, meaning that there is no way out for a specific country not to follow the sanctions. The EU Council usually uses this legislative act when it wants to make sure that all the EU states are bounded by that regulation. To whom do EU sanctions apply? EU sanctions basically apply to all persons that are within the EU jurisdiction. That means that it applies to all EU nationals in any location, entities that are incorporated under the law of an EU member state, including branches that are outside of the EU, foreign companies with respect to their EU operations and businesses, and on board of aircraft or vessels under the jurisdiction of the EU member states. An interesting question here could be if you have, for example, since we had orders from Belgrade, let's say if you have a Serbian company with a management board in which you have an EU national performing the function, let's say, of the president of the board, and your Serbian company is doing business with Russia. The question may arise whether this EU national actually performing businesses in Serbia is bound by sanctions, European sanctions. My opinion in that case would be that the answer is yes. It is bound because the EU sanctions apply to him since he is EU national, and it doesn't matter in which location he operates. In order to enforce the sanctions locally and in specific countries, of course, each country needs to implement or adopt certain internal local regulations. Slovenia adopted a regulations that prescribes fines for breaches of the sanctions. And as you can see from the PowerPoint, the monetary fines are quite severe. For example, legal entities can be fined with monetary fines up to €500,000. Responsible persons of that legal entities with fines up to €10,000, and any other individual with a fine up to €5,000 for an individual breach. If we are to describe the sanctions or divide them in two types, we can put them in one segment as financial sanctions. These are sanctions, you're probably aware of them. The EU excluded Russian banks from SWIFT system. Then Russian access to international reserves was restricted. EU restricted Russian access to capital and financial markets. There are other restrictions that deal with certain Russian state-owned enterprises and so on. The next type of sanctions that was implemented are, let's call them trade sanctions. These sanctions relate to prohibition of import or export of specific goods that are in particular important for Russia, like iron and steel products, solid fossil fuels, goods that generate significant revenues for the Russian economy, and also dual-use goods. What are dual-use goods? These are goods that can be used in addition to its commercial purposes, also for military purposes. Very significant for these sanctions is also that they are intended to be targeted. They are targeted to specific individuals, entities, and they also aim at specific state-owned or let's say state influenced media like Russia Today, Sputnik, and so on. And additional very important sanction was also the decision to close down EU airspace for Russian aircrafts. Despite the difficult situation that we had in the last 2 years, that difficult situation was especially related to the COVID-19 measures, the macroeconomic results in 2021 were relatively good. For example, the GDP growth in European Union was 5.2%. Of course, that goes with inflation of almost 5%. And Slovenia did even better. We had a GDP growth of 8% and inflation that is similar, or it was at the level of the EU inflation. The predictions for 2022 are not that good. They are being changed on a monthly basis, mostly due to the crisis in Ukraine. The predicted GDP growth for 2022 for European Union is 2.7%, with a high inflation that will likely exceed 6%. The predictions for Slovenia are a bit better in terms of growth of GDP, but even worse for inflation, where we expect inflation that will exceed 6%. But this can change, on monthly basis, and nobody expects that it will change to better. It's a fact that Ukrainian crisis affected predictions, and that this expectations will continue to lower for the future if the crisis will not stop. The Ukrainian crisis affected almost every segment of our lives. We see changes everywhere. We see changes in political approaches. For example, Ukraine gave up on idea of becoming a NATO member. Sweden and Finland would like to join NATO. And we also experience very, very significant developments and challenges in the EU economy, especially in energy sector and agriculture sector. The main challenges that we will be facing in energy sector are increase of prices of fossil fuels. This is something that we already experienced in previous months. We had regulation of prices, and we can see that current situation only presents further pressure on prices of energy and also fertilizers, which were already historically high. Another challenge that we will face are unreliable supplies and disturbances in supply chains. This is all well known, and of course the EU will need to implement some kind of action plan how to mitigate these challenging circumstances. One of the ideas of EU is that it intends to reduce dependence on Russian fossil fuels, but this is something that cannot be done, of course, overnight. And in addition to that, certain other measures will be implemented, like EU is considering to have gas storages, to do joint gas purchases, and I also expect that there will be some pressure on the changes of our daily life and our lifestyle. Another sector that I mentioned are the food markets and agriculture in general. The main problems, or let's say challenges that we are facing, are that the food security in the EU and around the world is uncertain. It is estimated that the Ukrainian crisis will not affect food security in the EU in the short term, but it would certainly have certain significant effects to the market situation in this food and agricultural sector. What can we expect is that in short, or let's say medium term, producer will feel the effects of rising input costs that are related mostly to energy, fuel, and increased prices of fertilizers, and also animal feeds. And of course, at the end, all this will reflect in the cost of final products. What EU is trying to do is to kind of change the approach to common agricultural politics. The EU intends to mobilize the agricultural areas, plots that were set aside, that are uncultivated. And I also expect that there will be some changes in regulation regarding state aid. I expect that more financial incentives from the states will be allowed and also acceptable in the long run. What we also saw and was to some extent surprising at the beginning is almost immediate exodus of very big multinational businesses from Russia. I came across, when I was doing research for this webinar, I came across a list of companies that exited Russia or in some way adjusted business there. And as you can see from, the source for this is New York Times. But as you can see from the list, these are some really big names. And looking at these names, I expected that these exits had huge impact on the Russian economy. However, I was a bit surprised when I read analyses that these exits were not such a big deal for Russian economy as I had expected. It is certainly a significant statement of businesses that are coming, let's say, from the Western world, that they disagree with the current situation, but the economic impact on Russia was not that significant. There are some reasons for that. For example, foreign direct investments are not that important for Russia. On the list of biggest foreign investors are countries like Cyprus, UK, Netherlands, Bermuda, and all these countries are known as very friendly to Russian money and capital. And it seems from that a lot of these investments that are considered as foreign direct investments are actually Russian money being channeled back through these countries like Cyprus, Netherlands, and so on. So this is actually Russian money behind that investments. The main question, of course, now is how the EU countries, economies, and businesses will respond to these changed circumstances. In the energy sector, it is to expect that we will have some price regulations, that temporarily we will increase the production of electricity from the traditional non-renewable sources like coal, wood, thermal power plants, incinerators, and so on. EU and EU countries will certainly look for new distribution channels for fossil fuels. What will also happen is that the situation will give another push, another boost to the strategies that involve investments in renewable energy sources, like investments in solar power, wind power, hydrogen, and so on. But this will take some time. And another interesting thing also is that we are again considering nuclear energy as a green type of energy. But also these investments in nuclear energy in order to obtain additional supplies of energy sources, this is something that can only be considered long-term. What can we expect in food and agriculture sector? First of all, I think that all countries will try to achieve certain self-sufficiency. All countries will try to mobilize agricultural lands that were set aside. We will certainly see some structural changes in agricultural production. I believe especially shifts from livestock farming to agriculture. And as I mentioned already before, some state aid regulation will certainly change. And if this crisis will last for a longer time, we can also experience some bans on export of food and related goods. At the moment, UE is in front of a major decision on whether to put embargo on Russian crude oil and petroleum products. This is so-called sixth package of sanctions. European Commission proposes embargo on Russian crude oil that should happen, let's say, in 6 months' time, and ban of petroleum products that should take place until the end of 2022. You're probably aware that especially landlocked states are not in favor of that decision. So the EU Commission is currently discussing and negotiating possible sanctions and certain deadline extensions for that countries. But we'll see what will happen at the end, because on the same page as Hungary, Slovakia, and Czech Republic are also Greece and Cyprus, since they are very strong maritime countries. They are strongly against another type of sanction, which would be prohibition of European vessels to transport Russian oil or to conduct ship-to-ship transfers that would enable exports to Europe. What is worrying for Europe is also, can Europe manage without Russian oil and gas? Most energy trade with Russia is currently still legal, as long as companies avoid dealing directly with sanctioned Russian entities. For EU, there is of course certain time needed to secure alternative supplies. Some countries are more prepared and some less, and some are also more or less dependent on Russian oil and gas. Another thing that is worrying is also supply of petroleum products. These are more concerning because 40 to 50% of Europe's diesel products is supplied from Russia. The main question here is ban on Russian oil and gas a suitable solution for current situation? We can already see that Russia is looking for ways to redirect oil flows to other markets. India and China are in particular interested for Russian products. And of course, as in case of any kind of prohibition, you always have individuals, traders, buyers, who will find creative ways to evade sanctions. In any case, we'll see what happens, and let's hope that the future will be peaceful and stable. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I wish, first of all, to thank SELA and Mate for inviting me to this webinar. As you know, I am here to speak about the Russian perspective, meaning about the countermeasures which have been undertaken by Russia since the outbreak of conflict in Ukraine on February 24 of this year. As you will see, Russian response has been on various levels, and they're primarily directed against what is called the unfriendly states. The unfriendly states encompasses, the term encompasses basically all the countries that introduce sanctions against Russia on various levels, and we can put them in different categories. But overall, we have all the EU countries, then some of the other European countries which introduce sanctions, such as the UK, Switzerland, Balkan states, and so on. Then we have the United States and other countries which are led by mainly the US allies across the world. Now, if we go more into that on what types of measures have been adopted by Russia against the unfriendly states, They basically include companies, individuals, and government officials from those unfriendly states across different industries, including the key industries such as the energy sector, food industry, and commodities markets and trade. We can. I summarized here on the next slide some of the most important countermeasures which have been undertaken by Russia, and which are aimed at tangibly affect the entities or persons from the unfriendly states. I will not go over all of them because you can read them. And they are basically self-explanatory. However, I would like to focus maybe on one or two of them just to give you a better representation of what those sanctions concretely mean for the Western countries, which are the countries which mostly introduced sanctions against Russia. I think one of the most important measures have been to oblige companies purchasing Russian natural gas based in unfriendly countries to pay in Russian rubles. The rationale for the measure, I believe, was twofold. I think the first key consideration for introducing this measure was to make sure that Russia gets money for the gas sold. For this, we can refer to the Iranian example, whereby Iran have been selling oil for years to the Western countries or across the world, and the money was blocked by the United States in various banks. So Russia wanted to avoid this kind of situation and to make sure that the money is well received. So this is why the unfriendly states based companies are obliged to pay for all gas deliveries to Russia, precisely to a special account open with Gazprom Bank. And you will note that Gazprom Bank has been the target only of the sectorial sanctions and haven't been placed on the, for example, the SDN list, which is the specially designated nationals list, which would prohibit Gazprom Bank from doing any business with Western countries. The second rationale for this measure was to make sure that Russian ruble is supported. As you may know, at the beginning of the conflict back in February and until I think mid-March, Russian ruble had lost approximately 40% of its value, or even more. To say concretely, before the conflict, one US dollar was approximately 72 rubles, and it went up to 110 or 120 rubles at the peak of the devaluation. And then, probably thanks to some of those measures introduced, including the measures regarding the natural gas payments, it went down steadily. And today, I think it's $1.60 rubles, meaning that ruble is about 20% stronger than what it was before the conflict. So actually, this shows that this measure was pretty efficient, a pretty efficient countermeasure. On the other hand, the gas prices went up to, I mean, they're very volatile, but they're in any case above $1,000 per ton. Then another measure I would like to speak about, and this is not on my slide, is basically the food industry. For those who are analyzing the markets, they may have seen that Russia restricted the exports of the fertilizers 3 or 4 months before the start of the war in Ukraine. It was around October, November of the last year. This had a pretty dramatic cause on the world market of fertilizers, because Russia is, I think, controlling or producing 50 to 60% of the world's fertilizer output. So this caused the prices to go up dramatically, which in turn caused the shortages on the world markets. And as a consequence, we have now the situation where, for example, in the Western countries, the output of the cereal production will be significantly less than it was in 2021. This measure, I would call it the indirect measure, was paired with another measure which was caused by the war, which is the inability of Ukraine to export its cereals. And Ukraine, together with Russia, controls about 30% of the world's cereal export market. And on the top of that, Russia also prohibited the exports of the cereals until June or July of this year. This is also causing the dramatic increase of prices of the cereals on the world market. But also, it is likely to have another effect, which I would call a countermeasure, an indirect countermeasure, which is to cause significant migratory movements from Asia and Africa to Europe as a result of the foods and cereal price increases. But this is something that we will see whether this speculation or this theory is correct in the next few months, probably starting from September or October. On the next slide, we see also some of the measures which have been undertaken to mitigate the international sanctions on the Russian economy. So these measures are not directly aimed against the Western countries, but they do have an impact on them. We see some very introduction of strict currency controls and foreign currency exports outside of Russia. We also see some very dramatic movements on the stock markets. As you may know, a number of Russian companies traded their stock on the foreign exchanges in the forms of the alternative depository receipts, ADRs. Now, as a result of these of the Russian measures, the issuance and trading outside of Russia of the ADRs is prohibited, and the Russian companies are being obliged to terminate their ADR agreements, and to convert the depository receipts into shares of these Russian companies. Now, these have an indirect, actually a very direct impact on the shareholders from abroad, from the unfriendly countries, which hold Russian ADRs, in the sense that they can no longer hold shares in Russian companies, and this is going to be interesting to see how this situation will be resolved. Another measure, which is not on my slide, regards the airspace industry. As a result of the Western sanctions, a number or almost all of the Western controlled aircraft lease companies terminated the leases and requested the Russian airlines to return the leased aircrafts. A number of some 40 or 50 Russian aircrafts have been also seized at the international airports. To counter this measure, Russia adopted another measure, which is to allow Russian aircraft companies to register all these aircrafts in Russia, and not to return them, which amount pretty much, I think, to a hidden expropriation of these aircrafts. And I think the value of these aircrafts is around 20 billion of US dollars. Also, you have some other measures, and for lawyers, there is one significant measure if they work with Russian companies. aside from the question how to get paid and where to get paid, is also to know that Russian companies cannot make advance payments any longer exceeding 30% of the sum of their obligations under contracts. So if you wish to kind of be 100% sure to get the fees or whatever services are needed, it is no longer possible. It is only possible to get up to 30% of the contract value. Now, I would like to just to give you my personal kind of view on the impact of the Russian countermeasures on the Balkan region, or on the Southeast Europe region. I think we can regroup those effects in two big groups. One concerns the groups of the countries which introduced the sanctions against Russia, which are the EU countries and the non-EU countries such as Macedonia, Albania, Montenegro, and so on. So those countries are pretty much having or suffering the same effect as the other countries of the Russian countermeasures. There is a number of restrictions for them doing business with Russia or purchasing commodities from Russia, and also assets of those companies in Russia may be subject to future expropriation. And I think the only other country which is kind of a separate group would be Serbia, which has seen a significant interest in terms of doing business for Russian companies. I think Uroš mentioned some of the statistics, but Serbia is probably seen now as the only European countries which is open for Russian business. And it's not only for payment purposes and so on, but a number of Russian companies see Serbia as the hub for the continuation of their European businesses, because to the extent that they would move a portion of the business to Serbia, they would be able, or most likely able, to continue doing business with the rest of Europe. So what would be the outlook of the future countermeasures? As we've seen in the West, the measures are kind of increasing in being, let's say, hostile. There is a number of proposals what to do next in Russia against the Western businesses or countries and markets. As you know, Russia is a very significant commodities player, so this influences everyday lives of the European citizens and countries. In terms of the Western businesses operating in Russia, there's a number of proposals to kind of position or regroup those countries in several categories. Businesses in several categories. One category would be companies which are inclined to stay in Russia and continue doing business in Russia, which are encouraged to do so, and which can pretty much continue doing business as usual in Russia from the Russian perspective. The second category would be the companies which are, for whatever reason, forced to leave Russia, but would like to live in kind of amicable terms, and that they're given the opportunity to give the management or sign the management to Russian partners, with the perspective of getting the businesses back after the situation comes back to normal. I think one of the biggest, most important examples is the French automobile producer Renault, which left or is leaving the Russian market, but which left the management of a very large Russian factory to the Russian government. And then the third category relates to the companies which are simply closing businesses and are leaving Russia. So their assets are pretty much doomed to get expropriated and to be lost in the short term. So this is from my side, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Okay, then I would like to thank you all one more time for joining us today. And I wish you all a pleasant and productive rest of the day. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.